Hi there. Well, if you've got this YouTube video link, then it's probably not because you're aware of me as some rising YouTube star. Probably it's because you're aware of this assignment that I've had to do for my studies, which is to think about some really big questions that people are asking about Christianity, and then have a go at sort of thinking through one of them and addressing it. And the particular question that I'm going to think about in this video is the question of why is it that religion seems to cause so much war? The way one friend put it is, doesn't religion say love thy neighbour rather than stab thy neighbour? And actually, to be honest, as I look at the history of religious violence, it really saddens me. You know, it's appalling to see so much blood that has been shed in the name of religion. So Christianity has got its crusades, its Inquisition, the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Islam has its jihads. There's Hindu nationalism on a huge scale in India at the moment, targeting Christian and Muslim communities, and even Buddhism has its own record of religious violence as well. For example, in Burma at the moment, in Myanmar, Buddhist people who are inciting religious violence against the Rohingya Muslims. And there's absolutely no point trying to pretend that religious violence isn't a huge problem. It is a really big problem, and a really saddening one, I think. But it is important to realise as well that actually it's not just religion that causes violence. So here's how the comedian David Mitchell put it. I don't know if you've come across him from the Peep Show or the Mitchell and Webb sketch show, but here's what he says. He says, "People say that religion has caused lots of killing and pain. I dispute that because so much killing was done in the name of communism or fascism. Humans have killed humans in the name of anything, whether it's religious or political or whatever. Humans just like to kill each other. And they'll use religion as an excuse, they'll use politics as an excuse, they'll use freedom as an excuse." Using freedom as an excuse to kill people might sound a bit extreme, but actually it has happened. In history, in the 18th century with the French Revolution, for example. And they, of course, were pretty anti-religion, pretty pro-freedom. But in 1793, they executed a French politician called Madame Roland. And Madame Roland had been involved in the revolution, but she was kind of considered not the right party. And she was executed on trumped-up charges. And as she climbed the steps to the guillotine, she said this. She said, "Oh, freedom, what crimes are committed in your name?" One writer puts it like this. He says, "God is not the common denominator in war. Man is." Or another way that he puts it, he says, "Our problem is not religion or irreligion, as in the lack of religion. He says, our problem is us." Well, where does that leave us? You know, you might say, well, sure, okay, fine, maybe religion doesn't necessarily make us worse off, but is it really going to make us better off with the kind of track record that it has of violence? Well, I'm not a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist, and so I'm not going to try and address the problems of violence that have been caused by people of those beliefs, but I will try and just briefly kind of think through the problem of violence that is done in the name of Christianity. And just a few things that have helped me to think about this problem. So the first one is that I always want to encourage people to look not so much at people that claim to follow Jesus, but to look at Jesus himself. Because Jesus he hated hypocrisy. He hated it when he saw people using religion as a kind of excuse to boost their own power and cause violence on other people. So just listen to what he said to people who used religion as an excuse for power. He said, "You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness." Jesus hates religious violence, but instead he loves peace. He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." He told Christians to love even their enemies, and even to not fight back when people attacked them individually. In fact, he put that into practice when he himself was crucified, and as they nailed him to a cross, he said, "Father, forgive them." That's the person that I follow. And I love it that Jesus is like this, that he is not the kind of person that incites religious violence. Secondly, another thing that's just helped me to think through this is that, we tend to think that if someone says they are a Christian, then they are a Christian. But actually, that's not how Jesus sees things. He says there are people who will say that they are Christians, but they're not real Christians. So here's something that he says, for example. He says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven." He says there are going to be people who say to him, "Lord, Lord," who say they're Christians, but he says they're not really. So, for example, just to show you what this looks like, let me tell you the story of a man called David Hamilton. So David Hamilton grew up in Northern Ireland in the Troubles, and he was kind of on the Protestant loyalist side of the conflict. And actually, as a teenager, David Hamilton joined one of the terrorist gangs. And it started with kind of marching up and down the street, and then there was some weapons training, and he got into kind of stealing cars for other men to use, and carrying ammunition in his school bag across the city. Then he it kind of spiraled down and got involved in some armed robbery and got arrested for that. But it wasn't too long before he was let out again, and then he got in even deeper. He joined a group called the UVF, the Ulster Voluntary Force, who were one of the most violent terrorist groups during the Troubles. And he ended up doing some terrible things. He ended up killing people and bombing buildings. And then he got arrested for that on far more serious charges than he had been the first time round. And all that time, David Hamilton would say that he would have said that he was a Protestant. He would have said he believed in God, that he was fighting for a good cause. But actually, looking back now, he would say, I wasn't really a Christian then. I wasn't really following Jesus then. It was actually in prison that David became a Christian. He tells the story that he heard the voice of God saying to him, "David, it's time to become a Christian." And he did. And his life completely changed. So when he got out of prison, he actually started working for peace and reconciliation. He went around with this guy who used to be part of the IRA, the very group whose members he'd been trying to kill, because he'd been so completely changed by becoming a Christian and trusting Jesus. So the first thing to say is to kind of focus our attention on Jesus, rather than on people that claim to follow him. The second thing is to realise that not everyone who claims to follow Jesus is a real Christian. Jesus says that himself. And the final thing is to realise that actually even people who are real Christians, who do follow Jesus, will sometimes do things that are violent and unjust. And that's because Jesus says that we all have a selfishness problem. A bit like David Mitchell said in that interview that I talked about earlier. He said, humans just like to kill each other. And Jesus would say a similar thing as well. I mean, he wouldn't say that everyone's selfishness leads them in that direction, but he would say we all have that problem. But Jesus is not himself part of that problem. He is part of the cure. In fact, he is the cure, he would say. So when one of his followers, when he was arrested, one of his followers attacked the guards that were arresting Jesus and actually cut off the ear of one of them. You know what Jesus said then? He said, "No more of this," and he healed the man with his wounded ear. See, Jesus is not for religious violence. Jesus is for peace. He changes religious terrorists like David Hamilton, and he can change you and me as well. Well, that's just some thoughts that have helped me to think through this question, but I'd love to hear what you think. Anyone watching this video, things that you agree with, disagree with, whatever it is, do get in touch. Hopefully you know how to do that if you got the link to the video. Thanks for listening.